Girls, what do you think when guys look at your breasts?
So, I was at this house party a few years back of those wild, overcrowded, who even lives here? Kind of parties. I was with a group of friends, including my longtime friend Sophie. She was one of those effortlessly cool people funny, confident, a little reckless in the best way. We'd been friends for years, and there had never been anything between us. At some point, the party got way too loud, and a few of us slipped outside to the back porch. It was a chilly night, and while I was fine in my hoodie, Sophie was not. She was shivering in this light little top, hugging her arms to herself. I half-jokingly said, "You should have brought a jacket, genius." She shot me a look. "Well, are you gonna be a gentleman or what?" Being the decent person I am, I pulled off my hoodie and handed it to her. She grinned, pulled it over her head, and dramatically sighed. "Ugh, so warm. You're the best." But then she pulled the sleeves over her hands, curled her fingers into the fabric, and hugged herself like it was the coziest thing in the world. And for some reason, that absolutely wrecked me. I don't know why, I don't know how, but in that moment, my brain went from, "This is my friend Sophie," to, "Holy sh*t, she's adorable," and suddenly, I was hyper-aware of everything. The way my hoodie drowned her, the way she absent-mindedly bit her lip while staring off into the distance, the way she smelled just slightly like my cologne now. I had never thought about her like that before, not once. And yet, right there, standing on that porch, watching her tug at the sleeves of my hoodie, I felt my entire worldview shift in real time. I must have been staring because she suddenly looked at me, smirked, and went, "What?" I panicked. "Nothing. Just thinking." She raised an eyebrow. "Thinking about what?" How dumb you are for not bringing a jacket." She rolled her eyes and shoved me, laughing, and I swear I almost blurted out something stupid. I never told her. I never acted on it. The moment passed, the party went on, and by the next day, I convinced myself it was just the atmosphere, the cold, the alcohol something. But man, I still think about that night. I was in college, sitting in the campus cafe with a group of friends, when one of my buddies waved over a girl he knew. She was gorgeous, confident, funny, and had this effortless way of commanding attention. We were all mid-conversation when she casually leaned forward on the table, arms crossed, and, well, let's just say physics did its thing. I tried so hard to maintain eye contact, but my brain short-circuited. It was like when your computer lags, everything else froze, and my eyes just dropped for a millisecond. She noticed immediately. Instead of calling me out, she smirked and said, "You done?" My soul left my body. I panicked and went full damage control mode, stammering, yes. She laughed, patted my arm and said, "Relax, I know they're great." The whole table lost it. From that moment on, anytime I saw her on campus, she'd dramatically adjust her shirt, lean forward and say, "Careful, don't hurt yourself." I'm pretty sure I never lived that down. I was at a coffee shop, sitting at one of those communal tables, just working on my laptop. Across from me was this woman, probably in her late 20s, scrolling on her phone. At some point, she leaned forward to grab her drink, and look, I swear it was unintentional, my eyes flicked down for half a second. Bad move. Because she noticed. She didn't say anything at first, just took a sip of her coffee, then suddenly locked eyes with me and smirked. "Nice?" she asked, completely catching me off guard. I nearly choked on my own coffee. I stammered, trying to recover. She just shrugged, took another sip, and said, "It's okay. I put a lot of effort into them." Then she winked and went back to her phone like nothing happened. I had no idea whether to be mortified or impressed. I was at the gym, mid-workout. When I made the biggest mistake of my life, I zoned out while resting between sets. You know that tired, glazed-over stare where you're not really looking at anything? Well, unfortunately for me, I happened to be facing a mirror, and directly in front of me was a woman adjusting her sports bra. I wasn't actually looking at her, but I guess my face was pointed in the absolute worst direction. She noticed. She locked eyes with me in the mirror. Panic set in. My brain screamed, "Look away!" But instead of a casual glance somewhere else, I whipped my head to the side so fast I nearly gave myself whiplash. Now, I definitely looked guilty. She turned around and said, "You good?" I scrambled to explain. "Oh no, I was just spacing out." I wasn't actually looking at. Stop talking, stop talking, stop talking. She tilted her head and smirked. Sure. At this point, I was sweating for two reasons. I decided the only way out was to accept my fate and leave immediately. For the next 2 weeks, I avoided that part of the gym entirely. I worked out at different times, took different machines, anything to avoid another interaction. But then one day, as I was leaving, I heard, "Hey, spaceman." I turned, and there she was, smirking at me. She held up a bottle of water and said, "If you're gonna stare at nothing, at least try not to look like a creep about it." Then she winked and walked off. To this day, I have no idea if she was messing with me or flirting. A few years ago, I was at a house party with a bunch of friends. It was one of those packed, loud, slightly chaotic gatherings where the music's too loud. People are crammed into the kitchen for no reason, and someone's always trying to drunkenly fix a Bluetooth speaker. I was sitting on the couch, half listening to a conversation, when my friend Emily plopped down next to me. Emily and I had been close for a while, always joking around, sending each other dumb memes, that kind of thing. She was gorgeous, but I'd never really thought about her in that way. That changed real fast. She leaned in, grabbed my arm, and said, "Hey, do me a favor?" I was already nodding before I even knew what she was asking. "My ex just showed up, and I don't want to deal with him. Can you, pretend we're a thing?" Now, logically, I should have just said yes and kept it casual. But my brain? Completely short-circuited. Because in that moment, she shifted closer, and suddenly, I was very aware of the fact that her hand was resting on my thigh. Yeah, sure, totally. Cool, just play along. Then without warning, she draped her arm around my neck and pulled herself into me, laughing like I'd just said something hilarious. And listen, I was trying to keep it together, but she was right there, her perfume, the warmth of her skin, the way she absent-mindedly traced circles on my arm with her fingers. I had never thought about Emily like this before, but suddenly my entire body was on high alert. She kept up the act for a while, giggling, touching my chest, even playing with my hair at one point. And the worst part? She was having fun with it. At some point, she leaned in and whispered, "Is he looking?" I had no idea. I was too busy wondering what the hell was happening to me. Finally, she pulled back, grinned, and said, "Thanks, dude. You're the best." Then she stood up and walked away like she hadn't just set my entire brain on fire. I just sat there for a minute, trying to process what just happened. Did she know what she was doing? Was I reading too much into it? Had I been secretly attracted to her this whole time and just ignored it until now? A few minutes later, my other friend Jake sat down next to me. He took one look at my face and went, "Dude, you good?" I was not good. I was at a coffee shop, just minding my business, working on my laptop. I had on a pretty simple outfit, nothing revealing, just a fitted sweater. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a guy sitting a few tables away. Every time I shifted or leaned forward, his eyes immediately went to my chest. At first, I ignored it. Maybe it was just a coincidence? But nope, dude was locked in like my boobs were broadcasting stock market updates. So, I decided to mess with him. I casually picked up my coffee, very slowly took a sip, then suddenly made direct eye contact. His face? Pure panic. He immediately looked away, pretending to read something on his phone. Then get this, he lifted his cup and completely missed his mouth, spilling coffee on his shirt. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. He bolted for the napkins, avoiding all eye contact. Lesson of the day? If you're gonna stare, at least be subtle. I was at the gym, just finishing up my workout, when I noticed a guy across from me in the mirror. Every time I moved, his eyes immediately dropped to my chest. I sighed. This wasn't exactly new, but this dude was not even trying to be subtle. I decided to have a little fun with it. I stretched my arms up real slow, watching him in the reflection. Sure enough, his gaze followed like a magnet. Then, just as he was locked in, I suddenly turned around and said, "Hey, you good?" His face went bright red like a tomato. He stammered something about just looking at the equipment, which was nowhere near me, by the way. I raised an eyebrow, nodded, and walked off, making sure to laugh just loud enough as I grabbed my water. Dude avoided eye contact for the rest of his workout. Pretty sure I made his whole week awkward. All right, here's another detailed story. A few years ago, I was at a cafe waiting for my order when I saw a woman standing at the pickup counter, scrolling through her phone. She was wearing a low-cut blouse, and when she leaned forward slightly to grab a napkin, I accidentally glanced down for a split second. It wasn't intentional, I was just looking around absent-mindedly. But she caught me. She looked up from her phone, raised an eyebrow, and said, "You done?" I froze. My brain immediately short-circuited. I wanted to say something smooth, something that would make this whole situation less awkward. But instead, what came out was, yeah? She just shook her head and smirked before turning back to her phone. I thought that was the end of it, but as she picked up her drink to leave, she looked over her shoulder and said, "Next time, at least buy me a coffee first." I was so embarrassed I almost walked out without grabbing my own order. The barista had to call my name twice before I snapped out of my self-induced shame spiral. The funniest part? A few weeks later, I ran into her again at the same cafe. She was in line ahead of me, and when she got to the counter, she turned around, made eye contact, and said, "Guess it's your turn." Then she bought me a coffee. We ended up talking for a while, and I found out she had the best sense of humor. Long story short, I learned 2 things that day on: women notice everything, and 2, sometimes, even the most awkward moments can have a happy ending. I was at the gym, just doing my thing on the treadmill, when I noticed a guy lifting weights in front of me. No big deal until I realized every time he finished a set, he'd glance over at my chest. At first, I thought, whatever, maybe I'm imagining it. But then it became so obvious she wasn't even trying to be subtle. He'd lift, glance, rest, glance, drink water, glance. I decided to make it weird for him. Next time he looked, I locked eyes with him, slowly tilted my head down, and stared directly at my own chest like I had no idea what was going on there. Then I looked back at him, raised an eyebrow, and mouthed, "You good?" His face went completely red. He grabbed his towel, muttered something, and rushed out of the gym like he had somewhere to be. Moral of the story: if you're gonna stare, at least be prepared to get caught. I used to work in a coffee shop during my college years, and there was this one regular customer, let's call him Jake. He was a little socially awkward but always polite. He'd come in, order a black coffee, and sit at the same corner table, either reading a book or scrolling on his phone. Nothing unusual. One day, I was restocking the sugar packets near the register when I noticed Jake standing a few feet away, frozen mid-step. He was staring at me, or rather, at my chest. Now, I'm not the type to immediately assume the worst. I was wearing a fitted t-shirt that day, but nothing overly revealing. Maybe he was just zoning out? I cleared my throat. "Hey, Jake, need something?" He snapped out of it instantly, his face turning bright red. "Oh, no, sorry. I just, He pointed at the menu like he had never seen it before in his life. "I was, trying to read." "Sure, buddy." I laughed it off, trying to ease his embarrassment. "No worries. Happens to the best of us." But here's where it got weird. The next time he came in, he seemed super cautious. He kept his eyes locked on my forehead like a soldier at attention. It was almost comical how hard he was trying not to look anywhere else. And honestly, that was more awkward than the original incident. Then, a week later, I found out what had really happened. Jake came in as usual, but this time he hesitated before ordering. "Hey, can I ask you something?" "Sure. So, that day when I was staring at you," he groaned and rubbed his face. "God, this is embarrassing. I wasn't actually staring at you. I mean, I was, but not like that." I raised an eyebrow. "Okay?" He sighed. "Your necklace. It was caught in your shirt, and I was trying to figure out if it was, stuck or if it was supposed to be that way. And then I realized how bad it looked, and my brain just crashed." I burst out laughing. "So, you were trying to solve the mystery of my disappearing necklace?" "Basically, yeah." He shook his head. I felt like such a creep, but I swear I wasn't trying to be weird. Honestly, I appreciated the honesty. We had a good laugh about it, and after that, Jake actually loosened up a bit. He stopped acting like he was afraid to accidentally glance in my direction, and we became casual friends over time. So, lesson learned. Sometimes, a guy might not be staring at your boobs, she might just be really confused about your jewelry choices. One time, I was at the gym wearing a sports bra and leggings, nothing too crazy, just normal workout gear. I was doing squats when I noticed a guy across the room clearly looking at my chest every time I stood up. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it, but then he started doing that thing where guys try to act like they're looking at something else, but their eyes keep drifting back. I even caught him pretending to check his phone while stealing glances. So I decided to test him. I pretended to stretch, arms up, full chest out, just to see what he'd do. Dude fully froze. Like mid-rep, just holding a dumbbell, staring like his brain short-circuited. I burst out laughing, and he immediately looked away, face bright red. A few minutes later, he actually came over and apologized, saying, "I swear I'm not a creep, I just kinda zoned out." I told him it was fine as long as he didn't make it weird. Honestly, it was kind of funny. I get it, sometimes people look without realizing it. Just don't be a weirdo about it, and we're good. I remember one time in college, I was at a party wearing this kinda low-cut top, not super revealing, but, noticeable. I was talking to this guy, and he was trying so hard to maintain eye contact, but his eyes kept darting down like he was fighting a losing battle. At first, I thought it was kind of funny. Like, bro, just look if you're gonna look. But then it started getting awkward because he was so obviously uncomfortable, like sweating, blinking too much, sipping his drink every 2 seconds to distract himself. Finally, I just said, "You can look, just don't be weird about it." Dude turned bright red, laughed nervously, and was actually way more relaxed after that. We ended up having a good conversation, and he even admitted that he was overthinking it because he didn't want to be that guy. So yeah, personally, I don't care if a guy looks as long as he's not creepy about it. A quick glance? Normal. Straight up staring like you're solving a math problem? That's when it gets weird. A couple of years ago, I was at the gym, minding my own business, running on the treadmill. The gym was fairly packed that evening, and right in front of me, there was a woman lifting weights, let's call her Emily. Now, I'm not the kind of guy to stare. I genuinely try to be respectful, and most of the time, I keep my focus on my own workout. But this particular day, Emily was wearing a tank top, and something about the way she was moving caught my attention. Before I even realized it, my gaze lingered for a split second too long. And, of course, she noticed. The moment our eyes met in the mirror, I panicked. I looked away so fast that I almost lost my footing on the treadmill. Trying to play it cool, I acted like I was suddenly very, very interested in the wall. Then, I heard her laugh. At first, I thought, oh great, she's telling her friends I'm a creep. But then, a few minutes later, she casually walked by my treadmill, smirking, and said, "At least try to be subtle next time." I wanted to melt into the floor. I mumbled some incoherent excuse about being lost in thought, and she just winked before walking away. For the rest of my workout, I couldn't decide if I was more embarrassed or impressed. It wasn't like she was mad, if anything. She seemed amused by my awkwardness. A week later, I ran into her again. This time, she walked straight up to me and said, "You gonna actually talk to me today or just stare again?" And that's how I accidentally met my ex. I was at a coffee shop just waiting in line when I noticed the guy in front of me glancing down at my chest. At first, I thought maybe he's just looking at my necklace. I had a small pendant on, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt. But then it kept happening. Every few seconds, his eyes would drift downward, then snap back up like he was trying to be sneaky. So, I decided to have a little fun. When he did it again, I suddenly looked down at my own chest, gasped dramatically, and said, "Oh my God, they're still there." The guy froze. He looked like a deer in headlights. The barista burst out laughing, and I just smiled at him like nothing happened. He mumbled something, grabbed his coffee, and walked out so fast I thought he was gonna trip over himself. Honestly, 10/10ths moment, no regrets. Back in college, I had a close friend, let's call her Sarah. We were part of the same friend group, so we hung out a lot. She was super confident, always cracking jokes, and had this infectious energy that made everyone feel comfortable. One night, a bunch of us went to a bar to celebrate a friend's birthday. Sarah and I ended up sitting next to each other at the booth, just talking and joking around. At some point, I noticed this guy at the bar who was very obviously staring at Sarah's chest, like full on, not even trying to be subtle. I leaned over and whispered, "That guy is straight up burning a hole through your shirt." Without missing a beat, Sarah turned to me and said, "Oh, I know." I raised an eyebrow. "You know?" She smirked. "Dude, I always know. You think I don't notice when guys do that?" I was kind of caught off guard. "So, what do you think when that happens?" She laughed and took a sip of her drink. "Depends. If it's some random guy at the bar, whatever. If he's cute, I pretend not to notice until I make eye contact, then I give him the 'I caught you' smirk. And if it's some creep, I make it as uncomfortable for him as possible." I had to know. "How?" She grinned. Watch this. She locked eyes with the guy at the bar, leaned forward, and stared directly at his chest like, full commitment, no blinking, scanning him up and down. Then, she slowly raised her eyes back to his face and gave him the most exaggerated, judgmental head tilt. The guy immediately panicked, looked away, and pretended to check his phone. I lost it. Sarah just shrugged. Men don't know what to do when the tables turn. I'll never forget that. It was honestly one of the funniest and most badass things I'd ever seen. Ever since then, whenever a guy is blatantly staring, I remember Sarah's words. Make it awkward for them first. I was at a cafe with my friend, just chatting and enjoying our drinks, when I noticed a guy at the next table glancing down at my chest every few minutes. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it, but then my friend noticed too. She smirked and whispered, "Wanna mess with him?" I nodded, and we started planning. I suddenly looked down at my own chest with a confused expression, as if something weird was happening there. My friend did the same, staring at me like she saw something shocking. The guy looked panicked. His eyes darted between us and my chest like he was missing something important. Finally, I leaned toward him and asked, "Is something wrong? You keep looking. Should I be concerned?" He turned beet red, mumbled something about zoning out, grabbed his coffee, and bolted out of there so fast he almost tripped. My friend and I couldn't stop laughing. Seriously, if you're gonna stare, at least don't be so obvious. I was at the gym, just finishing up my workout, when I saw a woman struggling with a barbell. She wasn't in trouble or anything, but it was clear she was pushing her limit. Out of instinct, I glanced over a couple of times, ready to step in if needed. Well, after her set, she stood up, caught me looking, and raised an eyebrow. "You good?" she asked, wiping sweat from her forehead. Now here's the thing, I wasn't even consciously staring at anything inappropriate, but the moment she called me out, I realized my eyes had dipped slightly below eye level at some point. Panic mode activated. Yeah, I was just, I fumbled for an excuse, completely blanking. She smirked. "Figured. Just so you know, they're real." I must have looked horrified because she laughed and added, "Relax, dude. I don't mind as long as you're not a creep about it." Then she fist bumped me and walked off like it was just another Tuesday. Meanwhile, I stood there questioning every life choice that led to this moment. A few years ago, I was at a cafe, waiting for my order, when I saw a woman standing at the pickup counter, scrolling through her phone. She was wearing a low-cut blouse, and when she leaned forward slightly to grab a napkin, I accidentally glanced down for a split second. It wasn't intentional, I was just looking around absent-mindedly. But she caught me. She looked up from her phone, raised an eyebrow, and said, "You done?" I froze. My brain immediately short-circuited. I wanted to say something smooth, something that would make this whole situation less awkward, but instead, what came out was, yeah? She just shook her head and smirked before turning back to her phone. I thought that was the end of it, but as she picked up her drink to leave, she looked over her shoulder and said, "Next time, at least buy me a coffee first." I was so embarrassed I almost walked out without grabbing my own order. The barista had to call my name twice before I snapped out of my self-induced shame spiral. The funniest part? A few weeks later, I ran into her again at the same cafe. She was in line ahead of me, and when she got to the counter, she turned around, made eye contact, and said, "Guess it's your turn." Then she bought me a coffee. We ended up talking for a while, and I found out she had the best sense of humor. Long story short, I learned two things that day on: women notice everything, and two, sometimes, even the most awkward moments can have a happy ending. Back in college, I had this friend, Rachel. We met during freshman orientation, clicked immediately, and became super close. She was funny, effortlessly confident, and had this way of making everyone around her feel comfortable. We never had any romantic tension, at least. I thought we didn't. One night, a big group of us were crammed into a tiny dorm room, watching some dumb horror movie. You know how it is, blankets everywhere, people squeezed onto a single bed, someone sitting on the floor with a bowl of popcorn they think they're in control of, but absolutely aren't. Rachel and I ended up sitting next to each other on the floor, backs against the bed. The movie was terrible, so we were mostly just making fun of it under our breath. At one point, she nudged me with her foot and whispered, "If you were in a horror movie, you'd definitely die first." I whispered back, "Excuse me? I would be the final survivor." She smirked. "Nah, you'd trip over something and get taken out immediately." I scoffed. And you wouldn't? She just shrugged, then casually leaned her head onto my shoulder. It wasn't a big deal, right? We were friends. Friends lean on each other. But something about it, maybe the weight of her head, the way her hair smelled faintly like vanilla, or just the complete casualness of it sent my brain into a tailspin. I sat there, suddenly hyper-aware of everything. The warmth of her against me, the way her breathing slowed as she got comfortable, the fact that this had never happened before. And then, without even looking up, she mumbled, "See? You're too comfy. That's why you die first." I don't know why, but that destroyed me. I spent the rest of the movie trying to act normal while my brain screamed, "Why is this so nice? Why do I not want her to move? What is happening?" The movie ended, people started leaving, and Rachel stretched, finally lifting her head off my shoulder. She didn't say anything about it, didn't act weird. Just shot me a lazy smile and went, "Night survivor boy?" I went back to my dorm that night questioning my entire life. We never talked about it, never repeated it, but I swear, for those few minutes, my entire perspective on her shifted. Back in college, I had a really good friend named Emily. We clicked instantly, same sense of humor, same love for terrible horror movies, same ability to spend hours talking about absolutely nothing. Everyone always asked if we were a thing, but it was never like that. She was just Emily, me best friend, my partner in crime, my go-to person for late-night Taco Bell runs. One night, a group of us planned a road trip to a cabin for the weekend. The plan was simple: drive up Friday night, spend the weekend hiking and drinking around a campfire, then head back Sunday. We packed everything: snacks, sleeping bags, an unreasonable amount of alcohol, but, of course, completely forgot to check the weather. We got hit with a massive storm. We had planned to sleep in tents outside, but the rain was relentless, so we all crammed inside the tiny cabin. There were only a few beds, and since Emily and I were the last ones inside, we got stuck with the old, barely holding it together pull-out couch in the living room. "This thing is going to destroy my spine," she groaned, flopping onto it. I laughed. "We'll survive." Now, here's the thing. I knew we'd be sleeping next to each other, but in my head, it was just logistics. No big deal, until we actually got in bed. The couch was tiny and uncomfortable, and sagged in the middle, which meant we both kept rolling toward the center right into each other. At first, we laughed it off. "Guess we're cuddling whether we like it or not," she joked. But then, at some point in the night, I woke up to find her completely wrapped around me, like head on my chest, legs tangled with mine, one arm draped over my stomach, kind of wrapped. And the worst part? It felt really, really nice. I tried to ignore it, tried to just go back to sleep. But then she let out this little sigh and nuzzled closer. I was wide awake after that. Every nerve in my body was on fire. I was suddenly hyper-aware of how soft her hair was, how warm she felt against me, how her breath tickled my skin. My brain was screaming, "Dude, this is Emily, your best friend. Stop thinking weird thoughts." But my body was very much not listening. Morning came, and she woke up still snuggled against me. She blinked a few times, looked up at me, and then without even thinking mumbled, "You're comfy." And then she just went back to sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, questioning every single life decision that had led to this moment. We never talked about it, not once, but to this day, I still wonder if she was awake for any of it.